This time, if I can have okay. Thank you. Just a quick introduction to why I became interested in this area. It may be helpful for you. I'm not a full-time monk, and in Singapore it's difficult actually to be full-time in any of these pursuits. I'm a lawyer by private practice. I've been running my own practice for about 22 years now. The work I do is actually civil, corporate work. I advise companies. I do a lot of civil litigation, which means I spend a lot of time in court. So my day normally begins fighting with people, generally ends fighting with people. I also do a fair bit of family law, which means you have lots of possible divorces, mediations. I do arbitrations, I do alternative dispute resolution. So I've been doing quite a bit of this for some time. I'm born and brought up in Singapore. My parents were born and brought up in Singapore. My grandparents were born and brought up in Singapore. So I'm third generation Singaporean. I guess for me, very early in my life, I recognized one concept. And it started when I was in primary school. And that is, every time I thought I was happy, the thing that made me sad was that the happiness somehow didn't last. And I kept looking around through my primary school years for a time when I can be happy for as long and as extended a time as possible. But I found that very often, the day I began my pursuit for happiness, that day actually all the conditions of anxiety and distress began. And then I began trying to understand what would be the reason why when I get something which I think should make me happy, after a while I find that I'm not very satisfied with it. And after a while I begin to try and understand what is the connection between satisfaction and happiness. So I was fortunate because I managed to get in touch with many learned and saintly personalities who, some of them were in Singapore, some of them outside of Singapore. But they pointed me gradually to understanding that there are certain principles in life which are necessary for us. And one of the most important principles is actually the principle of satisfaction. And sometimes it's so difficult for us to be satisfied in this world. And even if you want to be satisfied, for example, sometimes you're just surrounded by people who will not allow you to be satisfied for long. And even if you want to be positive about something, if you want to be happy about something, sometimes your family situation, your company situation may not always allow you to do that. The problem is that we don't live in a vacuum. So whatever I share with you is not just based on my personal experience, but it is also based on great thinkers from all faiths. It is based on great scriptures of all faiths. And it is based basically very often on what we call common sense. Whatever I share with you today, honestly, as you walk out of here today, after you have had a good feast, you will find that it's not something that you never knew. But sometimes when you put something externally, things become clearer. And sometimes when you are in the company of like-minded individuals who are trying to find satisfaction, somehow satisfaction becomes more attainable. It's stated very nicely that in the company of drunkards, even if you drink mineral water, eventually you will have to start becoming attuned to being a drunkard. It's very difficult not to be. And it's also said that in the company of saintly people, even if you choose to resist saintliness, eventually it has a way of getting to you. So we all recognize the value of association. And that's why we thought, let's gather everyone today, those who are interested, and let's try and share something on what we call the perfection of satisfaction. I also believe that the reason why you and I meet is actually not accidental. There's always a reason why two people have to meet. And there's a reason why we meet at a certain point in our lives also. So our scriptures tell us that nothing is actually accidental in one sense, but everything is actually in one sense an arrangement. If we look at life that way, then life becomes very meaningful. Otherwise, everything seems to be an accident. Okay? I know many couples who come to me for divorce, and I ask them, the first question I ask them is, why did you get married? And tell me, Siva, it was an accident. Well, marriage may or may not be an accident, but you can avoid it from becoming an accident. It's actually it has a lot to do with what you want. So let's look at satisfaction. Let's try to understand it. All that I say is not, it's not, how would I say, it's not absolute. Each one of you will have had your own experiences. I can only share mine. So I request you only one thing before we start. You please keep an open mind. An open mind, is like a parachute. It only works when it's open. If it doesn't open up, then the mind becomes very difficult. If you walk into a place to find fault, believe me, I'm in the profession of finding fault. It's very easy to find it, right? We are trained to anticipate faults, and we are trained to find mistakes before you see the mistakes. So let's have a mood of trying to understand that we are all looking for something, and that is what we call satisfaction. The premise to that is very straightforward. The reason why we want to talk about satisfaction is because you find it is very elusive. If it was something very easy to get, then we don't need to sit down and discuss the topic. We can discuss other things. But the truth of the matter is, our scriptures, our experience, they all tell us that our lives are very, very, very challenging. Living in Singapore is also very challenging, isn't it? We have a saying amongst the locals in Singapore that in Singapore you have to keep working until you die. And if you stop working, then you die. So it's like that. It's very difficult to live in Singapore. It's not an easy place to live. But then, there's no place in the world that's easy to live. Because the nature of the world is that it is very challenging. And very often, when I give these talks, especially in companies, I do a lot of this in companies, most of the company managers who come to see me and ask me to talk about this, the biggest problem they say is that everyone feels like they are in a pressure cooker. And at work, it becomes so difficult to find any satisfaction. And because there's no satisfaction at work, all the pressure of work comes home, and while home should be a peaceful place, you also make it into a pressure cooker. So satisfaction is not just you, it's also about people around you. And that is why this is a very important point. There is stress, there is anxiety, and there is always disturbance. And the reason why we are disturbed is actually because of one very important concept, which I'm coming to now. To make it very clear, there are actually 5 principles that we can actually try to utilize in the pursuit of satisfaction. But before I try and share the 5 principles with you, I thought it would be good to look up the definition of satisfaction in this world. Of course, you have many dictionaries that say that, but I found this one very interesting. Satisfaction is a happy or pleased feeling because of something that you did or something that happened to you. It's a lot more deeper than the usual idea of satisfaction. The usual idea of satisfaction is a fulfillment of a desire, isn't it? When you look at most dictionaries, they tell you satisfaction means I had a desire, I had it fulfilled, and therefore I am satisfied. But this one goes a bit deeper. And this says that the feeling that you get when you are satisfied is that you should be happy and pleased. Sometimes people come and ask me, how will I know if I'm satisfied? Because sometimes it's difficult to know if you're satisfied. Actually, it's very simple. If you are really satisfied, you will have 2 feelings in your heart that comes with satisfaction. They are like brothers and sisters. You will feel happy and you will feel pleased. Happiness sometimes is up and down, but the sense of being pleased is sometimes more settling. It is deeper. That's why it is used as happy or pleased. And notice something else. Satisfaction is a feeling. Isn't it true? Satisfaction is not something mental. It is not something where I and you use word jugglery and have a word gymnastic, or we argue till the cows come home and then we are satisfied with our logic. That satisfaction is very, what we call, intellectual. But the satisfaction that you and I are really searching for is actually a feeling. Because once the heart becomes satisfied, then I think in your experience you'll find that everything else in your being actually comes into place. It's a very important point. Unfortunately, we live in a world where many things that we discuss, we tend to discuss them on an intellectual level. But it's very difficult to make them deeper and make them touch our hearts actually. So that's why satisfaction is a feeling. And why does satisfaction happen? Because it happens because of something that you do. In other words, satisfaction is connected to activity. It's not just a thought. You'll find in your life that every time you thought about something, but if you didn't act on it, the satisfaction of it is gone. If you say that, if you love someone and in your heart you always keep saying that I love him or I love her very much, that's one thing. But if you can express it, that's another. But if you show it by action, that becomes complete. So we have a saying that every thought must translate into an action. And every action must translate into a will. That is why satisfaction is also an act of will. It is our birthright to be satisfied. But the problem is sometimes we look in the wrong places. So satisfaction is a feeling. Satisfaction also leads to an activity. It is something that you can do. Or satisfaction is also something that happens to us. We've felt that very often, isn't it? We feel satisfied because maybe our children did something so nice for us. When I was young, I remember buying presents for my mother. And then after a while, I didn't understand the logic because I was 5 years old, didn't have money, wanted to buy chocolates for her. So I'd ask her for money, buy the chocolate, wrap it up and give it to her. A few years later, I realized that I was using her money to buy her presents. But when I asked her, how did you feel about it? She said, I felt deeply satisfied. And I said, why? It wasn't my money. She said, it wasn't the money, it was the action. It was something somebody did for me. And because you put so much feeling into it, that's what made me satisfied. So in a very simple action like that, a deep meaning of satisfaction comes. So it's a very beautiful definition, and I think it's something that we should really think about. The other point that's given is the act of providing what is needed or desired, and the act of trying to satisfy a need or a desire. The second definition I want you to keep in mind, because we will come to the second definition as we go through it. And you will come to understand in your own experience whether is it very simple to satisfy a need or is it very simple to satisfy a desire. So that's the definition. Now let's share with you the 5 principles. The 5 principles that we have found in so many scriptures and experiences are these. First, to accept more and expect less. Second, the universe is your university. The third, the secret to satisfaction is the joy of service. The fourth, simplify. Don't complicate your existence. And this is where the second definition comes in, needs versus wants. And the last, the beautiful concept of unity in diversity. All we will do for the next half an hour or 40 minutes is try to unpack them and try to see if these principles are helpful. Are they all mutually exclusive? No. Do they overlap? Almost always. Some of them will appeal to you more. Some of them in your own life experience may not appeal to you more. But that's the beauty of it. That's why we're all human beings, because we're different. Let's look at the first one. The first principle is to accept more and expect less. Notice, because sometimes people argue with me, they say that in this world, it's natural to have expectation. It is. But the statement is, you can lessen it or you can increase it. We're not telling you to completely eliminate it. That's a different story altogether. The only time the scriptures say you will have no expectation is when you are dead. Only a dead man has no expectations. Other than that, all of us will have some level of expectation. But the important thing is, what are we accepting? And what are we not expecting? This is an important point. The important thing for us to understand is that everything in this world has a nature. Have you noticed how your brothers, your sisters, your wives, your husbands, after some time when you get to know them, you realize that they all have their own natures. Sometimes you agree with their nature, sometimes you don't. Have you also noticed how sometimes the thing about nature is no matter how much you want to try to change a person's nature, you can stand on your head upside down for the next 30,000 years, and even if they change for a while, they also change according to their nature. Very difficult. Very difficult. That's the reason why in Singapore and in many parts of the world, so many marriages break down. Because before they get married, they both profess intense love for each other. And in the caption of their love, they say, I love you because I accept you for who you are. Whoever you are is what I love. Finish. End of story. We're very happy. The day after you get married, you realize that he or she keeps changing things about you. No, I don't like this about you. You should be like that, you should be like this. And after a while, the person who got married thought, wait a minute, I thought you married me because you love me the way I am. And halfway through marriage, hey, this is very different. Believe me, from the legal point of view, it's making lawyers lots of money. From the spiritual point of view, it's an important concept. We don't accept that people have their own innate nature. And innate nature means that very often they have a predisposition. Nature versus nurture is always a big topic. In Singapore, it's always been a big topic, even with the government. Many years ago, we had a debate where it was actually floated, the idea was floated that graduate mothers should have more children. If you were Singaporean, you remember that. And after a while, the idea was that, well, actually, graduate mothers would have a predisposition to intelligence. Therefore, their children, by logic, should actually be more intelligent. And then there was a question and debate about, well, you don't have to be born intelligent, you can nurture intelligence. But you know enough, you've lived long enough to know there's only so much you can nurture. But you always nurture against the canvas of nature. That's an important point. So the nature of everything is there. And nature defines us. What is the nature of fire? The nature of fire is to burn. What's the nature of water? The nature of water is to flow. If you take the nature of burning out of fire, you won't even call it fire. If you take the nature of flowing out of water, you won't even call it water. So actually our nature is intrinsic to us. We take that out and we're not who we are. So the first thing that's really important is actually to accept each other's nature. A more accepting way of accepting each other's nature is actually a very quick route to becoming satisfied, especially when we interact with each other. It's the interaction between two people that causes a lot of satisfaction or dissatisfaction in the world. Isn't it true? There's only so much you can buy. There's only so much you can live alone. 90% of our lives will be interaction. And satisfaction will depend on how we interact. If we interact all the time, not accepting the nature of each other, but rather fighting each other's nature, we can never be satisfied. Why? Because we can never be peaceful. There is an intrinsic link between peace, happiness, and satisfaction. Just like everything else in this world has a nature, the Bhagavad Gita, for example, tells us that the world also has its own nature. The world that we live in. Just like every game has its own nature. You can't sit playing a game of chess and keep insisting, no, we're not playing chess, we're going to play Monopoly. You won't even start the game. The biggest problem of achieving satisfaction is that we don't understand the nature of the world and we don't understand and accept what it is. So actually, the scriptures tell us that the most important nature of the world is that it is temporary. Temporary. And if it's temporary, what does it mean? If it's temporary, it means whatever that you attach to it will also be temporary. You cannot be attached to something temporary and get something permanent. It's just not possible. If you hold on to a floating log, it doesn't mean you're permanent. You will float with the log. Therefore, the nature of the world is temporary. Nothing will last in this world. Even matter. This harmonium will outlast most of us, hopefully. But at some point it will also deteriorate. But most of us will not last very long because of the nature of this world. And when something is temporary, it is very natural that whatever we invest in it will also become temporary. And when it is temporary and the investment is temporary, then there is no satisfaction. Why? Because we expected it to be permanent. That's the problem. We always expect that something which is with us must last forever. And yet we don't realize that all of us are never going to last forever. If you have read the Mahabharata, you would know that there was a very interesting question posed. The question was, what is the most wonderful thing in the world? And the answer is very interesting. The most wonderful thing in the world is that every day somebody is dying. But those who live actually believe that they will live forever. Isn't that wonderful? How many funerals we've attended, and at every funeral we feel very bad, but we never walk out. Or sometimes we walk out thinking, well, my funeral could be around the corner. That's a difficult thought. We think, no, it won't happen to me. I will live a bit longer. It may happen to someone else, but actually it won't happen to me. And that's the most wonderful thing in the world. So one thing that helps us in satisfaction is to start accepting that whatever we have is temporary. If you expect permanence from temporary nature, then you will become disappointed. And if you become disappointed, you cannot become satisfied. So that is a very important point. The conditioning of human nature is such, is that we become very, very filled with anxiety in our experiences. If we expect good weather and bad weather comes, we are disappointed. We expect a good marriage, bad marriage comes, we are devastated. We expect that today, okay, he's going to say something sensible, but after 1 hour, nothing really sensible. You will become very disappointed. Then will be a tragedy. A lecture on satisfaction will end up proving to you how dissatisfactory it is. So, the moment we expect something, by default, at some point, especially if our expectations are very high, you'll find that it is very hard to be satisfied. Have you met people in your workplace whose expectations are so high, nobody, including themselves, can actually meet them? And they are the most difficult people to fulfill. And God bless you if they happen to be your superior. Because if that happens, right, you are living a life of chasing and chasing and chasing and never reaching the goal. It's very difficult. But have you met people who, they expect something from you, but they also accept the good things that you have to give? When you accept, there's another virtue that comes with acceptance. You become an encouraging person. And when you encourage someone who's trying to do something, believe me, it goes a long way to that person. And when you encourage someone on the basis of acceptance of who they are, they actually perform much better in the long run. Why? Because they have that encouragement. They have what we call the positive vibrations coming. That's why it's important to accept and expect. Both are necessary. If you are a superior in office, you cannot say to your men or women, I have zero expectations from you. That's it, you'll be fired tomorrow. You need to set levels of expectation, but you need to balance it more with acceptance. Because the more you accept someone, the more you're able to deal with the situation. It's a very important point. So accepting the nature of temporariness is a very good start to becoming satisfied. And when we accept more and we expect less, we actually achieve two other virtues that many religions speak about. And sometimes it sounds very esoteric, but it's a very simple way to achieve it. You naturally become more detached, and you also naturally become more renounced. Sometimes, when we speak about renunciation, the idea of renunciation is you must wear orange robes, you must leave everything, and you must be in some corner of the world. But actually, if you live on the principle of accepting more and expecting less, automatically you become detached from that which cannot last. And you become more accepting of the fact that this world is so fluid that it is surprising if anything is permanent at all. I have found this to be very helpful, especially when I deal with clients. Because clients and lawyers, we have a very uneasy relationship. Every client thinks that the lawyer is out to cheat him. And very often clients want to claim $1 million, but they want to pay their lawyers $100. And if we ask for 10 cents more, they think, aha, you're going to ask for more. So the expectations of clients is a constant challenge we have. It helps me very often when I say, every client that comes into my office, the first principle I will do is, let me accept him or her for who they are. And then let me work from there. But the moment I have an expectation that exceeds an acceptance, I am in trouble. So your personal relationships become enhanced. Your working relationships become enhanced. If you just accept that whatever that is in this world cannot last. That includes yourself. It's a very humbling point to keep in mind. The second point is, if you become very expectant in nature, then you become very attached to that expectation. Isn't it true? Think about it. The reason why we expect something from someone is because we think that this is the right way to do it. And we become attached to that idea. And when the person cannot deliver, you will find one thing very true. You will find that you become anxious because actually you are losing something. That's the other problem in this world. The first is temporary. The second is we believe that everything belongs to us. But actually, very little belongs to us. We may believe that our family belongs to us. Maybe to an extent they are with us. But whether they belong to us is a different concept. If something belongs to you, it should go with you wherever you go. That should be the definition of belong. But unfortunately, when you leave this world, you cannot take anything with you. Nothing. There is a historically recorded evidence. I loved history when I was in school, so I remember this very well. Alexander the Great, you all know him, great conqueror, right? No one conquered as much as him. Maybe Genghis Khan, but no one else after that. So, Alexander, was a great conqueror, but he died at a very young age. And he died of such an innocuous disease, isn't it? Literally from a mosquito. Now, when Alexander was on his deathbed, he employed the best doctors from across the regions. And he was hoping that he would survive. As time came and he realized that he was not going to survive, he actually asked for 3 things to be done at the point when he was going to die. The first was that at the point after I die, I want all the doctors who worked very hard to become my pallbearers, to carry my coffin. My second wish is that after I die, I want my hands, which will be in the coffin, to be put out, and my palms to be open. The third wish that I want is that I have collected a vast fortunes of coins, very valuable coins from across all the conquest nations that I've conquered. I would like all these coins, not so much, but some of them, to be strewn on the streets in my funeral procession. 1 or 2 ministers, we don't know, actually queried this point. Why, Alexander, these 3 points? What is running through your mind? And Alexander gave a very interesting point. The first thing he said is, I want the pallbearers to carry me because it is an indication that at the time when I am going to leave this world and after I've left it, whatever best medicines and best doctors will not be able to save me. Whatever expectations I had from them eventually will die with me because they cannot save me. And that is part of life. Nothing you have belongs to you, and everything that you have must leave. The second thing I want to do is, I want my hands outside. I want to do that because I want the world to understand that though I accumulated vast fortune, when I leave, I take nothing with me. Nothing. If only I was satisfied with what I had when I lived, instead of thinking that I will collect everything and one day become satisfied. That would have been much better. So that was his point. And the third point was, I want some coins of mine which are very valuable to be thrown on the streets. Because I want to show the world that all that was of value, it may have given me some happiness, but ultimately the happiness is temporary. And it took me a long time to realize that. Then he said something that's even more interesting. He said, something that's really interesting? At the end of the day, when I throw all these coins on the ground, and even if proclamations are made about why I did this, people will still run after all these coins. They will still pick them up. And they will still think that this coin will become the source of my happiness. And that is the nature of this world. It's a very interesting point for us to think about. So, the more we start accepting people, the more we start accepting what comes to us, the more we develop a positive attitude. The more you expect something from something you cannot control, the more you become disappointed. The more you become disappointed. And that is why it is important to accept the nature of the person next to you. This is a very interesting verse from a scripture known as Srimad Bhagavatam. It is known as the Bhagavata Purana. It says, different people have different mentalities, full stop. I really like this line. If every one of us could absorb this line and lived it, whether we live with our families, whether we go to work, whether we are anywhere in the world, it begins our journey towards acceptance and satisfaction. The beauty of life is that you and I are different. That is the beauty of life. So if we accept that someone has a different mentality, then what happens to us? How do we act? Then it becomes not our business to either criticize someone or to praise them. We are not attached to them, neither are we detached from them. Otherwise, the nature of those who expect is that we fault find. And the moment we find fault, we criticize. And have you noticed something about people who are critical in nature? They never sleep well. If someone is envious of you, he's also very critical of you. And if you notice, if you have been ever envious of someone or angry with someone, you'll notice one thing. You cannot sleep in the night. But the person you're angry with or envious with, they sleep very well. They sleep very well. But you are the one with the whole burden on your head. So actually, when we accept people, and we accept they have different mentality, we stop the blaspheming, we stop the praising, we only desire for their welfare. And we hope that at some point of time, their interests and our interests actually become aligned. It is a very Buddhist, a very Zen, a very Hindu, a very universal religion kind of perspective. And it really helps us work towards satisfaction. So the formula for living in this world, as far as this particular aspect of principle is concerned, is what we call the platform consciousness. Now I'm in Singapore, so trains, the trains in Singapore, your platforms are not very good examples. But I travel a lot in India. And supposing, I go to Rajkot, I don't know who's there, is anyone, from Rajkot, Dwarka, if you're from that area, okay, fine. So we have a temple project in Rajkot. And previously we had a temple project in Dwarka. So what would happen is I would fly into Mumbai, and from Mumbai I would take the Saurashtra Express. And it would be a long journey because it cuts through so much of Gujarat, Vapi and all these places, Valsad, and it goes all the way up to Dwarka. A good 21 hours. Now sometimes I couldn't get that train and I would have to move trains at Jamnagar. So at that point I would have to stand at the platform and I would wait for the next train. Someone else would be on the platform too. And sometimes your waiting time is long. So what happens is, sometimes there are seats, and we sit on the platform. You have your luggage, I have my luggage. And we sit down and we talk to each other for a while. And after talking, we realize, hey, we've become quite good friends, We have things in common, we share things, we wait for the train. But when the train comes, we don't tell each other that, look, now let's sit down together and continue our conversation. Or we don't tell each other, look, let's get married now, though it's happened before to some people. But we don't do that. What happens is, we both know that our time is coming. And when the train comes, we take our luggage, we get on board that train, and we move on with life. Because there was no expectation, our time together was very satisfying, very pleasing. Of course, if you meet someone who's hell, then good luck to you. But if you meet someone who's very normal, in the normal scheme of things, you find actually travelers make the best companions. You know why? Because we know we're not going to be with each other too long. That's the subtle instinct that we all have. We may not acknowledge it, but it's deep in our hearts. If we can transplant that mood into the world, you'll find that we start looking at the world with a different lens. You'll appreciate your father at home because you don't have so much time with him. You'll appreciate your wife because your time with them are limited. You'll appreciate your children because they're going to